There's a statistic out there that less than 2% of development aid goes to specifically gender equity programs. So girls' education, women's empowerment programs. And we know that women are change makers in their communities. It's one of the biggest, I think, developmental solutions that we have is to find different ways of supporting women and girls. We want to strengthen their leadership, strengthen their support system, their networks, resources, really anything we can do to help them rise, because we know supporting women-led organizations can amplify their impact in their communities. I mean, women and girls are the answer. When girls are educated, families come out of poverty. When women are empowered through social enterprise programs, their families have access to healthcare, they have access to education. It's community centers get built. I mean, it's the answer to a lot of the need in the world.
Before we jump back into today's conversation, I'd like to thank our episode sponsor, Women Connect for Good. Women Connect for Good is what founder Dr. Nancy O'Reilly calls a social profit foundation, committed to achieving gender equality and empowering women to lead. Their mission is rooted in a simple but powerful belief. When women support one another, entire communities become stronger. Through advocacy, education, and community building, Women Connect for Good supports more women access the opportunities, resources, and support they need to thrive. That mission aligns closely with what we believe here at World Pulse, where women and allies come together to share stories, lift one another up, and create meaningful impact. To learn more about Women Connect for Good and their work, visit drnancyo'reilly.com. And now, let's get into today's conversations. Today, I'm joined by Jenny Clark, social impact leader, communication strategist, and co-founder of Women's Empowerment Coalition, a nonprofit working alongside grassroots women leaders to strengthen communities across Kenya, Costa Rica, India, Peru, and Cambodia. With more than a decade of experience spanning communications, fundraising, nonprofit strategy, and international development, Jenny has dedicated her career to building authentic partnerships that center local leadership and create lasting community-driven impact. Jenny, welcome to the podcast. We're so happy to have you here today.
Thank you so much, Sheena. I'm very excited to be here.
Yeah, well, I'd love to get started from the beginning of your journey. So every person who dedicates their career to social impact usually has a defining moment, right? So what first sparked your passion for working alongside grassroots communities and women leaders around the world?
So I was young. I was getting into traveling. I had done some backpacking around Southeast Asia, and I was very fortunate to meet a really wonderful organization that has since closed. At the time, they were doing international project work for mostly educational programming. And I joined one of their volunteer trips. I did some volunteering for their administrative communications marketing team on the off season, off traveling. And I fell in love with it. I loved the model. I loved how they really prioritized finding local people, grassroots organizations, existing efforts, and just building from there. So that really was an aha moment for me. I think mostly, though, it was a passion for traveling that drew me to this work in the first place. And I was just really fortunate that I had a good group to kind of guide me in healthy directions. And I think from that moment was kind of the eye-opening, seeing the industry, voluntourism. There's so many different responsible travel organizations and the spectrum of how much they focus on volunteer experience versus the community experience. It's vast. So I think that's kind of what started me on this path of recognizing that there is a healthy way of visiting other places, of connecting with other people, and of doing the work of project development, of management, ethical storytelling. There's just a whole spectrum there that exists out there. So, but it really was just a passion for learning about new cultures and meeting new people.
How long did you backpack in Southeast Asia for?
3 months. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty incredible.
Thank you. Yeah. I always say it sounds like a long time, and I also could have kept going. I think I have that desire to engage with the world. And it was a formative experience for me and really shaped how I live my lifestyle now and how I prioritize my work.
And now I know that you've worked across communications, fundraising, nonprofit strategy, and also international development. So looking back, was there a thread, connecting all those experiences that perhaps you didn't recognize until much later?
I loved this question. It actually really sparked a lot of different potential answers for me. But I think the one that will resonate most and makes the most sense is just how to understand storytelling and ethical ways of sharing about my own experience as a volunteer, as a traveler, while also sharing dignified versions of community stories. So ethical storytelling, really wanting to center community stories and experiences primarily around development work as well. So just that kind of tension that I know I'm sure you felt too traveling. It's like there's my experience, and then with volunteering, it's the same. There's the volunteer experience. Student led trips are similar. Like there's a student experience, but there's also a community here and there's a cultural experience. And how are we inviting students or volunteers or travelers into other places in a way that's not only, interesting to the travelers, but also helpful and formative and productive and respectful for the communities. So with WeCo, we just want to take that to like the next level, which is we start with that project development. We start with that needs-based community input, and then we kind of work a volunteer experience around that. So short answer would be storytelling. I was drawn to other people's stories, other culture stories, other development stories that really highlighted like there's a healthy way to do this. And, I wanted to put our energy and put my energy there. More content doesn't mean better content. So how can you, not be oversimplify these stories, but there's just a balance there. Yeah, there's a real balance to storytelling. I write our blogs. I love writing. I have a background, I have an English degree, so I love to read, I love to write. So I can be wordy, but so I have to talk myself down sometimes, cut that down.
I'd love to transition to the Women's Empowerment Coalition, or WECO, as you like to call it. So you co-founded this with a simple but powerful belief, right? Which is that lasting change begins at the grassroots. What gap did you see that convinced you that this organization needed to exist at that time?
I love this question again. Yeah, I think from different traveling and different volunteer programs that I had been associated with, I kept seeing that there were qualified community leaders, local leaders, these really wonderful grassroots organizations that had been doing work for years, sometimes decades, and just spinning their wheels, just constantly trying to sustain their work, just struggling to find resources, just really working hard to keep doing what they're doing. And they were under the radar of larger funding organizations, foundations. They weren't, either their annual budget wasn't high enough or a number of other kind of eligibility requirements that they didn't meet, but they weren't getting the kind of support that they clearly needed and in our opinions deserved, particularly women's organizations and women-led initiatives for gender equity, for all kinds of different women's issues. I think the number has actually gotten worse, but I know there's a statistic out there that less than 2% of development aid goes to specifically gender equity programs. So girls' education, women's empowerment programs. So we wanted to catalyze those efforts that we were coming across, that we were seeing, that were local led. And we know that particularly gender equity, I mean, women are change makers in their communities. There's countless indicators of success, of measurements. There's studies out there that lasting change in communities begins with women. And women use resources, they amplify other voices in their communities, they share. It's one of the biggest, I think, developmental solutions that we have is to find different ways of supporting women and girls.
And now I know that WECO also works alongside women leaders in countries like Kenya, Costa Rica, India, Peru, and Cambodia. So, what have these communities taught you that has fundamentally changed the way that you think about leadership and development?
I love how collectivist cultures really value relationship building, value patience, value the pace of time in a unique way. I think in Western countries, we're conditioned to move quickly, to solve problems, to be action oriented. And I'm certainly like guilty of that. And I don't think that's a good or a bad thing always. I think we have multiple tools as a world, as a global community that we can rely upon. And when you come into a different country, a different culture, it's pretty paramount that you prioritize those approaches and those solutions and to listen to local leaders on what they know about their lives, their communities, their people, their projects. So I think it's kind of ironic to me, in order to scale, in order to have the kind of measurements of success that are important, that are absolutely important to projects, to project management, often you need to move slower. You need to work at the pace that works where you are. Also being very flexible and open to project timelines getting pushed back. Accounting for the unaccountable, so the unanticipated or the unexpected storm or delay, or there was a terrible accident in rural Peru and now we can't get the materials that we needed to build this structure that we were going to work on. So knowing how to pivot and just building that in, that just having a kind of understanding that that doesn't indicate any kind of failure. It just means that you're working within the infrastructure that you're working within and the culture that you're working within. And that's just part of the project success, not a delay or a setback. That's just part of it.
I know that WICO has been exploring what ethical partnership and international volunteerism can look like in practice. So, based on your own experience, what do you think people usually misunderstand about what meaningful global service actually looks like?
Yeah, I mean, I think community knowledge is really such a foundation for longevity for these development solutions. And leadership can look different. It doesn't have to, we think of it as, or we maybe tend to think of leadership as bold and, like assertive and all of these very like kind of explicit, overt examples of what leadership is. And I think it's often just the small, unsexy actions that we don't necessarily want to write about or focus on. But that's what leads to, I think, really quality development work, quality relationships. So it is. I think it's starting with that community need and community understanding. It's beginning with those early steps and just being patient to get on the timeline to those success measures, to those stories, to those kind of, one page like impact, like here's what we do, here's the exciting bit. Like that still is important and worth sharing, but just knowing that this is an incremental journey and the volunteers are part of that, and it's absolutely important for them to have a quality experience and a cultural experience that builds on their understanding and their own individual sense of the world. And I think, again, it's decentering that experience to some extent when it comes to looking at the work and really centering the community-based leadership and community-based collaborative effort there. I see it as kind of flipping it a little bit. Like it's not, we have so much knowledge, we have the resources. Let us come in and tell you and explain and show. And sometimes there are resources, sometimes there are helpful solutions that we can bring, but that's not the starting point. And that's definitely not the majority of the work, in my opinion.
I know that that's one message that comes through in WICO's work is that sustainable change begins with listening to local communities and rather than arriving with all the answers. So, knowing that, how has that philosophy shaped the way that you approach partnerships today?
Yeah, I mean, I think I just ask questions. Never stop asking questions. I think that's my biggest piece of learning and advice is ask plenty of questions, get to know your limitations as a funding organization. So I don't think that we can solve everyone's need or problem. It's about finding the fit. So we also are very honest and transparent about what our organization can do. We're a small team, but I think it really is listening first. It's understanding the kind of needs that we're working within and then seeing if we're a good fit. If we're not, that's okay. There's no pressure to force a project or force a volunteer trip. If it's not going to work, it's not going to work. Yeah, I think it really is around having a sense of intellectual curiosity about these projects, about the kind of co-created solutions that we're having, and trying not to at the same time overburden our partners. So I know that a lot of funding organizations have a long list of eligibility requirements, of vetting questions. We have that process, but we also try and do plenty of research in advance so that when we are meeting or doing a site visit, um, we're it's an additive experience, ideally, for our community partners, and not something that's taking them away from their work as well, or burdensome, because grassroots organizations are pretty stretched thin. I mean, these are community leaders that come from the communities that they're supporting typically. They're overworked, they have day jobs, they have a lot going on. They're running sometimes several programs with volunteer support or limited staff. So we really want to be mindful about how we can add value and not wasting people's time. But yeah, I mean, I think sustainable impact comes from strengthening those kinds of community leaders and asking good questions.
I'd love to connect to one of the central themes of this podcast. And so one of those themes is the idea of supporting others as you rise. So throughout your career, what have you learned about using your own influence or opportunities to open doors for someone else?
I think that's a really beautiful way of looking at the work that we're doing with WeCo just in general. I think what we want is for women around the world, for girls around the world to have some kind of critical support that they haven't had access to, that we have, that we can help create more access to, so that they can actualize their potential, so that they can continue to grow as humans in their development, as, ideally as contributors to the gender equity cause. But really, I think it's just that's so central to our work is it's like ripple effects. We want to find, and usually the community leaders that we work with are women, not always, but probably close to 95%. We want to strengthen their leadership. We want to help strengthen their support system, their networks, resources, really anything we can do to help them rise, because we know, similar to the model that we were discussing earlier, we want to be a link in that chain that's really supporting women-led organizations to do their work so that they can amplify their impact in their communities. And that's the piece that we fill. But really, I mean, I think to get more tangible, I mean, we have a community leader in Kenya who's a Maasai woman who's worked for her community-based organization for over 20 years. And she has helped countless girls avoid FGM, avoid early marriage, and stay on track to school, to Maasai is a very rural tribe, so girls often are taken out of school at like age 12 or 13. And her program alone, I mean, she's keeping these girls in school for junior secondary school. So I mean, we find these kinds of women who are doing these programs, and we just want to help them. We just want to help them in whatever way that they can, because they're doing this work and they're such resilient humans and resilient examples of what women can do. And so we really just want to catalyze those efforts and what they're doing, and just help access more resources so that they can have the kind of impact that they can have. Our partners that we work with, they're doing this work regardless of whether or not we're here. We just support and add a layer of commitment and funding that helps them continue to do it. But yeah, to your point, they've been doing this on shoestring budgets. They've been doing this because it's what their community needs, and they're not going to stop doing it. So it's pretty impressive, yeah.
And now I know that sometimes people assume that leadership, especially in this case, means having all the answers. From your experience, though, what qualities have you consistently seen in the strongest community leaders that you work with?
Strong, yeah. I'm trying to think of a different answer besides like asking questions, because I think that's always important.
Still a good answer.
Thank you. But I think it's particularly with the community leaders, there is a kind of resilience. And I mean, I think this term gets used a lot, lived experience, but I mean, the people that we work with deeply, deeply know the needs of their communities, and they also deeply know the solutions for their communities. It's, often it really is a matter of being connected to resources so that they can do the work that they know will work. So I think it really is just this dedication, knowing that their community needs something and that they can help. I mean, I think it really is partially why we do the work, knowing that our global community needs something and we're passionate to try and deliver it, and just feeling just the beauty when it comes together, and the joy and the success. I mean, women and girls are the answer to me. When girls are educated, families come out of poverty. When women are empowered through social enterprise programs, their families have access to healthcare, they have access to education. It's community centers get built. I mean, it's the answer to a lot of the need in the world. So it really is such a wonderful learning experience each time to figure out like what's the right avenue here, what's the right pathway for working with these women, and what are we going to come up with together. And it's always really wonderful.
I wanted to go back to the sustainability discussion because I know that WICO talks a lot about strengthening communities for the long term rather than, delivering short term solutions. So, going back to that note, what does sustainable impact actually require that many organizations usually overlook?
Yeah, I like this question too. I think a lot of organizations look at specific projects or programs, and we try to focus as well on the people. So, strengthening the people and the capacity of the organizations who are delivering those programs. We do project based volunteering. So, we typically have like a program or a project that we're fundraising around. But we know that strong organizations, strong local leaders are what keeps those projects going. So, how can we help their leadership capacity? How can we help strengthen their organization with other resources? So, sustainability, I think, is also part of looking at what kind of programs we're supporting and creating. And are we as the supporting organization helping to ask those questions during project development as well, so that it's not like, great, we funded this program, goodbye, but helping think through some of those future sustainability questions early on. So it's built into program development in a way that we're helping sustain through funding, through resources, but also we're trying to help our partners think through future funding opportunities and strategic partnerships potential as well. So, it's hard to say that means that all of our programs will live on forever and ever and ever, but I think so far it has worked, and it really is trying to look at how we can build that into the program that we're working on together.
I know that funders usually want measurable outcomes.
Yeah.
But as we also know, community transformation doesn't always happen on a quarterly timeline. So, how do you balance accountability with the patience that real change actually requires?
This has been one of the most critical parts of our work, is helping to tell that story. I think it's showing the short term, the midterm outcomes while being honest about the long term potential impact, and noting that will take years. For instance, we've been working in Kenya now for 2 years. We're just now starting to see some shorter term, midterm impacts, outcomes. And those outcomes can tell a promising story about the impact to come. But when you're looking at the kind of the impacts such as education, I mean, when I think of my own personal experience, it's like, did I know what my high school education was how impactful that was going to be, a year after I graduated, 6 months after I graduated? Of course not. So when we look at these kinds of expectations, I think we have to have a realistic lens on what we're asking and what we're expecting from organizations and from programs, and how we can also communicate it in a meaningful way to donors and to funding organizations, because that is important so that they understand the value of their investment. So, these short-term, midterm outcomes are important. Maybe these are like attendance rates or matriculation rates or grades or percentage of, increase in grade level, or, a number of other things that we can look at and we can report on. And I think it's also emphasizing that you're not going to solve, these kinds of problems in a year sometime, obviously, because we've been working on these for how many years? The SDGs were the MDGs, and this has been decades of development work. So yeah, patience is key, and good storytelling, but honest storytelling. I think you can still do it in a compelling way so that you can bring funders along without overpromising.
And now I'd love to spend a few minutes talking about your own growth as a leader. So I know that your career has evolved from communications to leadership and organizational strategy. What would you say has been the biggest leadership lesson that you learned along the way?
I'm going to think of a new answer because I think I've already touched on a few of them. Biggest leadership, like an aha moment. Yeah, this is a good one. I don't think I've talked about this. I think being okay with 80% good. So being okay with good enough and not perfect. I'm sure women watching this or listening can identify with this, but I think we tend to set a really high bar for what we should be doing and how we should be, in our career and our work and our projects, just setting that bar very high. And the expectations that I think I had for myself going into this work were pretty high. And knowing how to, I think from an ego perspective too, like remove that ego, but also in a like kind way to yourself. Like it's okay to make mistakes. This is a very it's not controversial, but I think it's a complex field to work in. And there's going to be nuance. There's going to be cultural, nuances that I miss or that, I make a mistake. Ideally, they're not major mistakes, but you're going to make mistakes. You're going to have minor failures along the way. Something's going to explode in your face that isn't, that you don't see coming. And you really just have to kind of roll with it. And it builds a resilient response system, I think, in your approach and in the work itself so that you get better at those kinds of responses over time. I often think that perfectionism is the death of progress because if you aren't letting yourself fail and learn, you're not growing. And that means that you're not letting the work grow either. So, it's difficult. I won't say that all of the failures or the mistakes or lessons are easy or, ideal, but I think that has been a really formative lesson for me when I look back is these mistakes, these tiny failures, they've actually helped me let go a little bit of, oh, but this timeline or, oh no, but we were going to do it this way. And oh, it could have been this way. And it's like, yeah, but it's not. So you can only do as much as you can. And that's also part of collaborating on larger projects is you're working with other people and other people have lives and you have to be understanding that that's going to dictate some of the progress as well. So really just letting go, I think, of some of those established, like, here's how we do project management, here's like best practices. I think you can know that and appreciate that and have that ideal, but also work within the reality of the world, which is very messy and complex.
I agree. So, working in social impact can be really deeply meaningful, but it can also be very emotionally demanding. So,
Yeah.
what helps you stay hopeful when progress feels slow?
Yeah, it gets tough. I honestly, it's up and down for me. It's frustrating. I'm not a very patient person at my core. I am a project management consultant. So I think I am very much like, let's just do this. Let's finally start doing this. And we work within the constraints of our cultural ecosystem. And I think it really is just letting go of some of that. Like you can do what you can do and you have to accept what you cannot do. Doesn't mean you have to accept the unjust systems that exist. But I think if you want to live and continue to make a difference, that's just going to kind of beat you down. So I look to my partners. Yeah, honestly, like I look to our partners and see them doing the work. And I'm like, if a Maasai woman who's done this for 20 years can get up in the morning and keep having the conversations, keep kind of dealing with the pushback that she gets from men in her community wanting to marry young girls and sell them for livestock, wanting to continue traditions of FGM. If she can do that, if our partners in Peru can wake up in the morning and, do their work in the cooperative that we've supported. If the women in Costa Rica can wake up and work on their coffee facility that we've supported, I can do this. I can wake up in the morning and do this work because we're doing it together. And I think it's building those kinds of narratives, which I love that World Pulse does this. It's like, we're not alone in this. We are a community of women. We're a community of practitioners that are working to improve the world for other women, for future generations of women. And that counts. That means something, even if often there's waves of news that's disturbing.
If every nonprofit, corporation, or philanthropic organization adopted just one principle from the way that WeGo approaches partnerships, what would you hope that principle would be?
I think it would be to value the small wins along the way because that's what creates the bigger wins along the way. So again, I think it is the unsexy day-to-day or kind of those small little pieces of the work that actually make it lasting, that actually do the kind of make the change that we want to see. And that's relational. So it's building relationships. It's taking the time to find the people who are doing that work. It's time intensive. It takes a lot of effort to do that from a funding perspective. So I get that that's often difficult, but I think if you are looking to make the biggest difference in the world, to actually address these problems that we keep seeing, that we continue to address and fight, you have to look for the grassroots community leaders who are doing this, who are living this daily, and who are, despite all odds, digging their communities out of this with the solutions that they know work.
If someone listening today wants to make a meaningful difference but isn't really sure where to begin, what's one small step they can take this week to start supporting others as they rise?
One small step? Yeah, I mean, I think I always say look local, like find, it doesn't have to be an organization, find a person, have a coffee meeting, find something that resonates with you and learn more about it. Take a step, an easy step, a phone call, coffee date, doing some internet research, fill out a contact form, whatever feels actionable. But just learn what's happening because there's a lot of really wonderful people doing a lot of good work. And I think it's easy to get siloed right now. We live in a very challenging time and an also very siloed time. So get out there in the community. If you're an introvert, I get it. Do one thing, one small coffee meeting or intro meeting with someone that's doing this work and just ask them some questions about their work and see what resonates with you.
Incredibly well said. Jenny, thank you so much for joining us today and for the work that you do. I think what stands out so clearly in your story is that lasting change doesn't happen by leading from the outside in. It really does happen by listening, building trust, and creating these genuine partnerships that allow communities to lead their own future.
Yeah, I really appreciate it, Sheena. Thanks for everything that you do, and it's really wonderful to be connected to World Pulse. It's a fantastic organization. So thanks so much for having me.
And to our listeners, if something in today's conversation resonated, we invite you to take the next step. World Pulse exists to be a digital bridge, connecting women across the world so that no one has to lead, learn, or build change alone. You can learn more by visiting impact.worldpulse.org, click on the link in the show description below, or subscribe to our channel to get real-time updates. Because whether you're here to listen, to contribute, or to simply belong, there's a place for you on this bridge. Thank you for joining us on the World Pulse podcast today. This conversation does not end here. It continues through connection. We'll see you next time. This episode was brought to you by Women Connect for Good. To learn more, visit drnancyo'reilly.com.